This is a Muscle Cat Media production.
Back on the expats again. This is how this goes. You miss like 5 months, and then all of a sudden you're back on the air for the second time in 4 days. Rollsy and Spoon. And Spoon was just so excited that he spent the entire weekend looking for futures. So we've got some pitcher plays for you today and a few team win over-unders. Spoon, you just can't control your excitement for the baseball season. Hello to you.
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you yesterday, I caught myself watching a college baseball game on a Sunday afternoon and realized I was clearly starved for baseball content and I could find a better use for my time. So I spent the next 3 hours instead starting to troll further through the dredges of preseason future plays. And yeah, pretty excited to talk to you about a number of strikeout markets today, as well as a few teams that could be a bit of value on some alternate win lines too.
For those that maybe weren't with us for the beginning of the season last year, we kind of rushed through these a little bit. Spoon did give us probably 3 or 4 that we ultimately came back to throughout the course of the year. But that's part of the fun of this, because we'll keep Spoon accountable. This is an integrity podcast, as we like to say over and over again. So it's always fun to look back on these sort of, third of the way through the year, midway point, and then sort of once we get to the business end. So the way this will work, we'll look at pitchers and team win over-unders today. And Spoon's got some home run props and some RBI props that he likes that we'll talk about a little bit later in the week. And maybe even hint at what we're going to do for Destiny Draft coming up a little bit later on this year. But Spoon, this is your show, my friend. So take it away. What have you got in terms of pitchers for us this year?
Alrighty, well, I'll make my case for each one, and then you and I can kind of have a little discussion around it. I think 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 3 of these guys are going to be in your division, your Cardinals division, in the NL Central. So let's see how accurate your projections are that they're going to be a struggling team, because as much as I was trying to instill a little bit of hope for your St. Louis Cardinals, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if they're up there hacking based on some of these plays that I've kind of outlined. First guy I want to talk about today is Brandon Woodruff. He's a really interesting case. He spent basically 2 years out of the league. He missed most of 2023, all of 2025, all of 2024, most of 2025. He came back last year for about a third of the season, and he made 12 starts. He had 83 strikeouts and showcased a dominant 11.6 K per 9. This mark was the highest in his career, and sure, it's a smallish sample size in the scheme of things, but it's also a third of a season. Even if he doesn't recreate necessarily the strikeout success that we just saw last year, he had 4 seasons of a 10.5 K per 9 in a row from 2019 to 2022, and managed really impressive strikeout numbers throughout those years. His best season in 2021, he finished 5th in Cy Young voting with a staggering 211 strikeouts, and then backed it up with 190 the year after, which was his most recent full season. There's still upside, I think, in his chase and his whiff percentiles on last year, because both were down based on sort of that 4 or 5 year run when he was active and healthy. And if he's able to get some of those peripheral stats back to where we've kind of seen him throughout his career, I think with a larger sample size, he's going to be able to match or even increase that strikeout rate from last year. I had a look at an interview today. That's how kind of sick I've gone for this at the moment. Where he spoke to Milwaukee media. He said his shoulder's the best it's felt in years, and he's finally got trust in his arm, his shoulder when he's throwing, to the point where he thinks he can just go out there and focus on his stuff. Freddie Peralta's moved to the Mets, so Woodruff is going to be the ace of this stuff. There's a lot of upside here, and you're getting $2.15 for 170 strikeouts, and then a value top up of $6 for 190, which, as I mentioned, he's managed in both full seasons. So that's a guy I think I'm going to be locking in pretty soon. I'd be interested in your thoughts on Brandon Woodruff.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Freddie, because I was obviously going to mention him moving over. It does feel like Woodruff becomes the guy. And interestingly, when you project each of those 2 guys out, because fastball Freddie's been the guy in Milwaukee for the last half decade, essentially. And he's the sexy guy. Yeah, well, yeah. But for Freddie, at least last year, or at least the last couple of years, I guess maybe last year because they were a better team than we expected. So it was kind of fun to watch Freddie pitch every 5th day. But if you had asked me blindly, which of those guys has a higher strikeout total, if you projected across a full season, I would have said Freddie Peralta, no doubt. But with these 2 guys, when you project a full season, Woodruff actually has a higher strikeout per season if each of them got the allotted amount of starts in their career. So I think that that's incredible value if you're looking at 150 strikeouts for a guy who's healthy now and whose career statistics are basically saying that he has the potential to be Freddie Peralta when it comes to strikeout numbers in terms of what he's done in his career. So did you say even money at 150?
170.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's incredible value. I guess the bet is you're just betting that he stays healthy.
Yeah. I think, and with a lot of these where I sort of talk about the ladder top up as well, you're probably looking at something like 3 units on the 215 and then, an extra unit on the 190 at $6 in this instance. Yeah, I mean, he's hit that 190 mark a couple of times in his last 2 full seasons. What he showed last year was that he would clear the 200 mark again. And a couple of seasons, 2019 and 2020, he was on pace for that as well, albeit, 2020 was a shortened season. I think, there's injury risk, but I'm not so sure, especially, with pitchers more than position players, whether there's necessarily more risk in taking a futures pick with a pitcher than there is a position player. And in some cases, you could potentially argue that there's less risk because a lot of guys do. The way we see modern baseball go now is like you're getting that Tommy John surgery at some point. Sure, you might need it twice. Some guys, in the last few years have had that happen. But with his out of the way, and then, really, he probably could have pitched earlier last year, but they took a lot of time with him. I think you can have a bit of confidence that his body is right to go. And this is a team that should be very competitive throughout the season, which is always sort of where you want to be, I think, for a starting pitcher prop, because, are they going to give him that extra start in the last week or two of the season because they know they need a win, as opposed to shutting down some top guys because, 30 games below 500 or whatever it is. The Brewers always find a way to outdo their expectations. And I think with Brandon Woodruff being the face of this staff this year, it's a play I'm pretty happy to take.
And look, those full season numbers are probably skewed a little bit because Freddie came out of the bullpen predominantly, when was it? Back in like 2019, 2020. I mean, he was largely a bullpen arm, but I guess Woodruff was as well, sort of his second year. He had 19 appearances out of the bullpen in 2018. But just to finish that thought, when those two guys, when you project them both across a full 162 game season, Woodruff would average 220 strikeouts a year to Freddie's 210. So essentially, you wouldn't really have thought on face value that those two guys would be comparable. But you bringing it up and then obviously looking at them side by side, it makes a ton of sense. So yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah, cool. Well, on the theme of potentially niche, arguably forgotten guys in a lot of sense, this one's got a little bit more risk, and I'll sort of explain why. And I won't be laddering it. It's just kind of a one and done on a singular line. Really interesting case, and maybe the most intriguing case for me as a starting pitcher in 2026 is Kodai Senga. With the aforementioned Freddie Peralta joining New York, he's the ace of the rotation. The Mets are looking like a team that could roll with a 6-man rotation. This is something they've already experimented with in recent years. And is probably one of baseball's more fascinating stories as a starting pitcher. His rookie season 2 years ago in the majors was at age 30. He finished second in Rookie of the Year. He was 7th in Cy Young voting. He was an all-star. He had a brilliant campaign, 29 starts and 202 strikeouts. His season in 2024 was cut short by injury. He made just one outing. And then last year, he made just 22 starts because they were really sticking with that 6-man rotation. And also he skipped a few starts anytime he was kind of less than 100%. They just passed him over in the rotation. So he only managed 113 innings last year. He still managed 109 strikeouts, though, in what was really a condensed season with a lot of sort of caution. And his strikeout rate was lower than we saw in recent years. And some of that was a little velocity drop, but also, the stuff probably wasn't as consistent because he didn't have the consistent starts. Despite this, though, his whiff rate and his chase rate were both similar to that of that stellar rookie campaign, which tells me that there's probably positive regression to come as far as a strikeout rate. Look, this play has a bit of risk. We're talking about a potential 6-man in a 6-man rotation, or worst case, a guy who kind of has to earn his spot as a starter. But all reports are that he's healthy and he's keen to play a big role in the Mets rotation this year. So I'm looking at 130 strikeouts for $3.60, pricing in a little bit of that risk. And to be honest, there I think is a genuine trade chance there as well. Which would probably only serve to boost the case, because if he's traded to a team where the Mets decide, 6 starters is sort of surplus to requirements. He can go somewhere where he's getting a little bit more time on the mound and potentially higher up in a rotation pecking order. I think there's upside there that kind of counters some of those questionable downsides.
Well, and I often don't like to do this when talking about Japanese guys that have moved over, but if we do go back and look at his career with SoftBank prior to moving to the big leagues, I mean, he would have gotten significantly fewer starts because they have a shorter season in Japan. So looking at the number that's 130 that you mentioned, and as you talked about, pricing in a bit of that risk, so going at $3.60. Just while I'm looking this up out of curiosity, can you get a lower number for Kodai Senga that's more of an even money figure? 110?
I believe there was a 120. I'll pull it up now because I had it in front of me before. I believe there was a 120 that was below even money. You can get $2.05 about 120, and then there's nothing. There's not even a price for 140. So for me, with all the question marks there, the difference between 120 and 130 for $2.05 compared to 360, I think I'd rather just be having 1.5 units on the 360 because I don't think there's a world where he finishes in the 120s. I think some of these stars align and he could well and truly smash past that 130 mark given he has a season with over 200, or all of those question marks I just flagged sort of come to fruition and he's not even able to make over 100. I'd probably just play it as a one and done.
Well, yeah, and build the value in with the figure that you like to see. And I mean, I guess the reason why I asked that question is because when you do look back when he was with SoftBank, I mean, he played 11 seasons in the NPB before he came to the big league. So the guy's been around forever. And I mean, you look back at like 2022, he made 22 starts, had 156 Ks. He made 21 starts the year before, had 159 strikeouts. So, I mean, this is a guy that's proven. And I mean, his K per nine in his career in the NPB is basically the exact same as what it's been in Major League Baseball. So for me, it says that the value and the pricing is built in because there's just so much unknown with him. But you're basically saying if he's back to anything like his best and is able to maybe get 6 or 7 starts more than what he had last year. And I mean, like you said, the trade is very much a possibility. I mean, who knows what the Mets are going to be doing around the trade deadline. But if he's in a 6-man rotation, the other thing about 6-man rotations is they sound good in theory, but how often do they really last an entire season? Really normally get a guy who falls off. Teams start with a 6-man rotation or start with the thought that they're going to do it, but ultimately the 5 best guys turn up. And somebody's ultimately going to get hurt, right? So a 6-man rotation always comes a 5-man rotation. So you do just feel like if he stays consistent and his strikeout per 9 figures basically stay where they've been throughout his entire career, that does seem like terrific value. I was actually shocked at how low that number is at 130 to get $3.60. So yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge Kodai Senga fan. I mean, I called him when he was on Team Japan in the Premier 12 back in 2019 and obviously followed his career a little bit in the MPB before he came to Major League Baseball. So, I mean, I've always been high on this guy. So I was, quite shocked at how low that figure is to get $3.60.
Yeah, and I think just rounding out your point around the 6-man rotation, you've got in that rotation, you've got Clay Holmes, who last year was his first ever year as a starter, right? Sure, he made 31 starts, but they actually had to drop him off noticeably. I think his second half from memory, I've got the splits here, but his second half was shocking. I'm thinking of the right guy that I was attacking regularly. His all his innings per start, his ERA, his strikeout rate just dropped off a cliff second half. So what are you going to get out of him as a starter? Sean Manaea made 12 starts for them last year. He's listed as 3rd or 4th in their rotation right now. He had a negative WAR last year with a 5.64 ERA. I think you could do a lot worse than giving Senga the ball and saying, you've done it before, can we get you to do it again? So for me, with noted downside, but also a few places where there could be upside, I would be pricing this at a $2 kind of play where, it's a true 50-50. So if I'm taking 360 and acknowledging the risk, I'm kind of happy to do that and move on. Next guy I wanted to talk about is a really interesting case again. Probably less risk than Senga as far as potential health of his arm. But there's definitely a bit of usage risk here too. And that's a guy by the name of Chase Burns. What makes this interesting is that there's a bit of talk that he might start the year coming out of the bullpen in Cincinnati, which he did do late in last year's rookie campaign. But he did that after he'd come back from the IL and the Reds were kind of making that playoff push and their rotation was really finely tuned and they were happy with the guys they had. Those who followed some of Baseball Expat's plays last year would have had some fruitful fill-ups on Burns early. He debuted with 8 strikeouts, and I think we were getting $9 or something about that alternate line on his debut. And then he had a double-digit tally in 4 of his next 7 starts. Included in there was just an absolute horror show at Fenway where it turned out he was tipping pitches, and I think he got tagged for 7 runs before recording 2 outs. But he adjusted very quickly and went on this run of 10, 10, 10 strikeouts, and there was value in pretty much every start. He missed that month of baseball sort of early August to mid-September. And then when he did come back, as I mentioned, he was a bullpen arm and he tallied 10 strikeouts in 9 innings. If Burns does take a setup role out of the bullpen for the Reds, he's probably only looking at sort of 60 to 70 innings, which won't be enough. Even with his K rate, that kind of puts his strikeout numbers in the low hundreds. But look, in my view, I'm happy to buy stock in this guy. He's a 23-year-old kid who has clear starting pitching stuff. Outside of one or two of those pretty average starts, he was dominating and he was making a lot of the best hitters in the league look average. His fastball's got serious run. I think he's working on adding an extra pitch at the moment, which would sort of solidify his future as a starting pitcher, not a bullpen arm. And, much like the Mets, if one guy goes down or struggles, even if he does start the year out of the bullpen, I would be surprised if there's not a world where he's making 20 starts. So the line I'm looking at is 160 strikeouts for $2.65 or 180 strikeouts for $7. I'll probably be staking this one a little bit smaller at the moment just because of the unknowns. And again, like with all of these, I'm not locking them in until I can sort of price check with every book and make sure we're getting best value. And by then we'll have a little bit more information, I think, out of Cincinnati with what they're thinking for Chase Burns. But it is a guy I've flagged as someone who it seems like they've just accepted might have a smaller role, where really he was their number one prospect when he got called up and made that debut last year. And for a month or so of baseball, he was dominating headlines.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, his numbers from last year are a bit skewed. I mean, there must be the injury concern with him, because I was quite surprised that he wasn't named for Team Italy in the World Baseball Classic. But I imagine a lot of that has to do just having an uninterrupted spring so that then he can come out and had a good sophomore campaign. But his strikeout numbers are kind of skewed when you actually do break down the game logs and go game by game from last year. In those games that he did start sort of early in the season, I mean, at one point there, he had 3 10-strikeout performances in a row. I mean, it was against Colorado, Washington, but one of those was against the Dodgers, and ended up having 4 of 5 in the middle of his year where he had 10 strikeouts. So he's shown that he can put a streak together. And if he does that and is starting consistently, I mean, I don't see why that 160 number is not achievable. 180 does seem a bit high for a guy like him for me, but I guess you're getting $7 to find out. But yeah, I mean, I think at 160, considering the fact that when he was pitching well in the middle of last year, I mean, there's not a lot of guys, starting pitchers nowadays, that'll have 4 of 5 starts in a stretch like that where they get 10 or more strikeouts. So he's proven that he can do it. And I mean, in those outings, let's just see how many innings he pitched in each of those outings. I mean, only one of those he went longer than 6 innings. So 4 of those 5, 10 strikeout performances. Like, for me, I like to look at guys that have stretches like that. Sure, you're not going to go out and strike out 10 guys a night. If he was, then that number would probably be closer to 200. I don't think you're going to get 10 strikeouts a night from a guy like Chase Burns, but he's shown that he can do it in stretches. So it's one of those that if he can have a cool month, but then all of a sudden in June or July, he runs 4 or 5 starts together, or all of a sudden you leap up by 50, 55 strikeouts and you're looking pretty.
Yeah, and I think to your point on the innings, what is really encouraging for me is that the 4 games of 10 strikeouts or more that you mentioned, he pitched over 90 pitches in all of them. So this isn't, some of the young starting pitching prospects where we love what we're seeing from them, and then they hit that like high 70, low 80 mark and they're getting hooked. Sure, things might be a little different, but look, he missed 3 or 4 weeks with an injury. It wasn't major enough that they shut him down for the rest of the season. They wanted to bring him back in some capacity to help out of the bullpen. I think with a solid spring training behind him, and I'm going to get to see that for the next few weeks before I lock this in. If they're using him as a starter and he's getting stretched out heading into that opening day of the season, I'll be pretty happy at that sort of 160 mark at $2.65.
And is it just a case of them not wanting to rush him along, do you think, in putting him in the bullpen to begin the season? I mean, I wouldn't think that the Reds would have any reason to. I mean, I guess there's so many questions with what's going on in baseball as with regards to next year, I guess, too. And it's all about keeping guys available, whether or not they can stay injury free for an entire season, whether or not they're used as trade bait. You wouldn't want to think that a guy like him that Cincinnati's already thinking about trading him, but does it seem odd to you that they're just trying to ease him into the season? Do you imagine that is because of the injury concerns that he had at the back end of last year?
I think so, but I think also if you look at the rest of that rotation, you've got Hunter Green, who for years has been, threatening to be a dominant starting pitcher, and he is when he's healthy, but he's missed a lot of time with his own injuries. Andrew Abbott's had some stints on the IL. Nick Lodola's had some stints on the IL. Much like the Senga case before, if he's starting there, but they know that he's stretched out enough to be a starter, you can't look at that Reds rotation and be like, okay, there's no way in for him, if that is kind of what they're thinking.
Yeah, so I guess it's just one of those. Let's not put too much pressure on the kid. Let him start out of the bullpen, have a bit of success. And as we talked about even there just before with the likes of Kodai Singh and the Mets, inevitably there's going to be an injury in your starting rotation. So if you're starting a kid like him out of the pen, the opportunity is going to present itself for him to start at some point, probably earlier rather than later. And maybe at that point, it's one where he enters the rotation and never leaves it. So it's an interesting play because you're maybe not exactly sure when he's going to get into the starting rotation, if he is going to start out of the bullpen. So I guess maybe that's a little bit of risk, which maybe then would make that 160 number seem high. Like if he's not in the rotation until the middle of May, have you done your dough at 160, at 265?
I think so. And I mean, it's probably one, like of all of these I discussed today, it'll be the last one I lock in. And as always, keep an eye on Twitter and that sort of, and socials for any sort of confirmation as to when to bet on some of these. Because as I said on last episode, some of these lines, like 160 for 265, for example, these are all just with Bet365. They're the only ones who are posted at the moment. You could be getting 350 about sports bet when that goes up. And then, you might be more inclined to just jump on that as it's there because that risk kind of being priced in is a little bit more acceptable. I do want to see, a couple of weeks of spring training and see what his role kind of looks like there before making a decision one way or the other. But I think he's definitely a really interesting case because he didn't spend, 3 years at the top of their prospect list just to become a seventh inning reliever. I don't think he's got the stuff. There's a pathway for him to move up that rotation pretty quickly. And he's in a division where he's going to see, a Pirates team that strike out a lot, a Cardinals team that might strike out a lot. And I think he can really cash in on those starts as we talked about with these high tallies.
Well, there's risks either way, right? So you probably do wait a little bit before you put that on. Whereas if tomorrow, let's say hypothetically, the Reds came out and said Chase Burns is going to be in the starting rotation from opening day, that number is probably not 160 anymore to get $2.65, right? So I guess that's why they call it gambling for a reason, because you've also got to, I guess, take a little bit of a punt on when you actually put the wager on. But no, that's those are three interesting ones to begin. Halfway home with your pitcher prop spoon. What else have you got for it?
I think you'll like this one. Another NL Central pitcher, a little bit of a theme here. I want to talk a little bit about Shota Imanaga. He had a very strange 2025 campaign because by all metrics, he was just kind of fine. He accumulated a WAR of just 1.5. He had an ERA of 3.73, which is, fine. A whip below 1, which was impressive. But he was sort of relying on a lot of contact outs, which was in line with his low strikeout rate of just 7.3 per 9. That was a big drop off from his rookie season in the majors the year before. We had a 9.0, and he finished 5th in Cy Young voting that year and tallied a massive 174 strikeouts in that campaign. Shota saw his peripherals of both chase rate and whiff rate drop last year, which correlates to that strikeout rate that I mentioned. But he still boasted an impressive 84th percentile chase rate. So he was crafty with his use of pitches, even if he wasn't kind of blowing anyone away or fooling them with the actual stuff itself. And he was capable still of having some starts with quite high strikeout tallies. His lines were always very low, but he had a couple of starts of 9, a couple of starts of 8, 7. And then where the tally was quite low for the season was because he had these 6-inning outings with 1 strikeout where he was just sort of pitching to contact. I think for me, this one kind of comes down to one key question of which year was the outlier. We've got a sample size of 2 years for this guy in the bigs. Was last year the outlier as far as, his strikeout stuff wasn't anywhere near as devastating? Or was that a down year and we can expect something close to what we saw in his rookie season? Because 174 strikeouts in 29 starts is very impressive. He had a 2.9 ERA, and he's pitching in that division that we've kind of spoken a little about already. So pricing for this, 140 strikeouts, $2.35, 160 strikeouts at $6. And I think 140 is absolutely in range when you look at, last year, while his season was fine, I think a lot of the strikeout stuff was almost too bad to be true. And with an 84th percentile chase rate, that includes all pitchers, including relievers. So yeah, he would have been well and truly in the top percent of starters for creating chase. I think he's hit that 174 mark already in the majors. To get $2.35 around 140 is, I think, great value. And I would be having something on the 160 as well, because that averages out to just over 5 per start. And he just needs to avoid some of those lengthy starts that he made last year with a low strikeout tally, because a few of those really take you off track too early. But he cleared 100 pitches in a game last year. He made 12 starts with 90 or more. So it's not a usage problem. In some ways, it's different to a Senga, where you need him to get those 5 or 6 within 80 pitches because he gets hooked a lot earlier. I think Shota has all the makings of a prime bounce back candidate, and I'm happy to take him on trust.
Well, and you asked the question as to which year potentially in the bigs for him was the outlier, but he's kind of done this throughout his Japanese career as well, where he'll have years where he has high strikeout rates and then that lowers back down. I mean, this was a guy that found himself in Australia in like 2017 playing with the Canberra Cavalry because he just couldn't stop being injured, right? Yokohama were always high on him. It was 2019, actually, as recently as 2019, when he was with Canberra. And I remember watching him whenever Yokohama sent him down here, and he always had a splitty that was going to play at any level, right? I mean, if you can throw a good split finger and your secondary pitches are good enough, like you're always going to be certainly a Japanese big leaguer, but I mean, he always had aspirations of getting to the big leagues. But he's kind of done this throughout his career. I mean, when you look at 2019 in the NPB, he made 25 starts for 186 strikeouts. And then jumped to essentially 2 years later when he was healthy again, he made 24 starts, had 151 strikeouts. The year after that, 24 starts, 188 strikeouts. So he's done this before where he just sort of jumps up and down, similar amount of starts, but the K rate just is all over the place. And, I mean, there's always ancillary things happening in the background. The stat sheet's never going to tell the entire story, particularly with a guy like Shota, who has had to battle injury basically throughout his career. And sometimes, I mean, as we know, guys can be battling injuries in season that aren't really spoken about. So was the outlier last year in the fact that it was just one of those dips that we've seen previously in his career, and he's going to be back to the form that maybe we thought about the previous season. And also don't forget, I mean, there was that huge deal with him pitching in Tokyo to begin the year last year. He pitched okay, and then it just felt like for the next 6 weeks, he just wasn't right for whatever reason that was. And I think maybe it's probably not just anecdotal, right? I mean, these guys get so jazzed up to go pitch back home in the Tokyo Dome. And then maybe it just takes a while to come off that high, and it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 starts to get yourself back. And by that point, a fifth of the season has gone by. So maybe with a little bit simpler preparation, he's not on the World Baseball Classic team, which I don't really understand. I don't really understand how Tomoyuki Sagano at 37 years of age gets a run on the Samurai Japan team when Shota Imanaga does it. But maybe that's from Shota, right? Maybe he's signaling that, look, the Tokyo thing for me was just a bit too much to deal with last year. I want to commit to the Cubs and make sure that I have a good season. So you're looking at numbers like 160, which he routinely hit whenever he had good years in the NPB, and you're getting odds like 235. So you're getting plus money at it. I'm on board.
Yeah, and I think just to your point as well about the preparation, if you look at his splits last year, his strikeout rate in the first half of the season was 6.4. His strikeout rate in the second half of the season was 8.1. So whether that's a combination of an unusual sort of start heading into the season, or he figured something out that he can now carry into this campaign, I also think it's a rotation with no clear ace, so to speak. He was the opening day starter last year. Projected rotation this year is himself, Cade Horton, Matthew Boyd, Edward Cabrera, and Jameson Tyone. You could put him as the 1 or the 4 in there, really. But I think, again, there's going to be a bit of expectation for him to probably, perform at a bit of a higher level. The Cubs, they haven't kind of made some of the moves that were maybe expected, although they obviously went and got Bregman and bolstered the lineup. Most of the rest of the team is kind of the same. So if there's going to be upside as far as how the season goes, it's going to need to come from some of these guys maybe hitting higher expectations that we know they can.
There's a very Japanese flavor about this segment from you today, Spoon. I like it.
Well, we're about to get away from that. So
that was going to be my next question. When's the Yamamoto play coming?
No, I would never, ever cheer for a Dodgers future. You know me too well. The fifth guy I want to talk about is another, maybe similar to Woodruff in a sense, but I think potentially even much better value than the Woodruff play. This is Shane McClanahan from the Rays. Now, he's a former borderline superstar pitcher, returning to the game, 2 years of absence due to injury. He had TJ 2 years ago, and then he had nerve issues holding him back the year after that. Again, I'm a sicko, so I've been watching interviews, and he just looks like a motivated 28-year-old who's in, the prime of his baseball career, eager to get back on the mound and kind of prove that he is one of the guys. And he showed a lot of glimpses of being that guy. And beyond glimpses even, he put together some stellar seasons. His last full season was 2022. He saw an impressive 10.5 K rate, convert into 194 strikeouts in 28 starts. The partial season the year after, he had 121 strikeouts in 21 starts, which kind of put some of these props right in range again. I think a full spring training for Shane in a division, we spoke about last episode as being strikeout friendly from the angle of Dylan Cease. He's going to see New York, he's going to see Boston, he's going to see Baltimore. I love, you can get 150 strikeouts for $2.20. You can get 170 for $5.50, and you can get 180 for $11. Given these are marks he's hit before, and has been on pace to hit again. Sure, there's that injury factor, but I think they really chose last year to not rush him back after the TJ because of the nerve concerns. I'm sure he could have factored into the season a bit more if the Rays were on track for a better year than they were having. This is a clear ace of the staff for me. Perfect bounce back play and a ladder that really tails quickly in value if he can put together the kind of season that I think he can.
You are a sicko, because I had completely forgotten that Shane McClanahan existed. And you would, right? Because, he hasn't pitched since 2023. He was high up in the Cy Young voting, I want to say, his second year in the league. What was that, 2022? He finished, what did he say, 6th or 7th in the Cy Young voting that year. So, you're putting him on a list with guys like Verlander, Cease, Shohei, Framber Valdez, and then McClanahan essentially was sitting behind those guys in the AL Cy Young voting that year. And we just haven't heard from him since. I admittedly had completely forgotten that this guy existed. He fell off the radar. I guess having not pitched in the big leagues for 2 years is the gamble you're taking, which is why it sounds like so many of those numbers are quite high. But if you are going to take a risk at a guy hitting a strikeout number and you're getting double figure odds to find out, this is the kind of guy to do it with. And he's already proven that he can hit those types of numbers. It's just how healthy is he going to be after 2 years being out of the game?
Yeah, and I think, this is where I like to buy when people are selling, right? And that's kind of how this ties in. There is a bit of a theme here, I guess, on that sense of whether it's injury or form related. We're talking about some bounce backs, but if you look at where some of the other guys are priced, like at the top end existing performers, like 240 strikeouts, Tariq Skubal, $2.10. There's just no way in the world I'm taking that over 150 strikeouts for Shane McClanahan, because there's so much that needs to go right for you to back that up. As opposed to, I think there's value here in some of these guys that are being overlooked because for different reasons, they weren't dominant starting pitchers in 2025.
Well, if we extrapolate that out, quick maths, do they expect that he will start the season in the rotation? Are they, you said you've been doing some reading and looking into what his season could look like. I would expect that they're probably not going to go in and stretch him out 80, 90 pitches on opening day. I don't know if he'll be their opening day starter. You're right. If he's at his best, he clearly could be the anchor of that rotation, but do you feel like it'll be a season where they'll really ease him into it?
I think he's listed, everything I've seen is projected to be the opening day starter. He's expected to be healthy. And if you look at this rotation, he's far and away the best guy. You've got himself as SP1, Drew Rasmussen as SP2, Ryan Pepiot, Steven Matz as SP4 in 2026 is just general manager malpractice. And then Nick Martinez to round out the rotation. This is, I think this is maybe where I spoke before about where Woodruff is in a great position, because the Brewers are going to be really competitive all season. And, there might be some of those extra starts getting thrown out there because they need him. I think the danger here is that the Rays potentially are just well and truly out of both the division race and the wild card race, and then all of a sudden you've got some back end risk. I'm much more concerned about the the last month or so of the season with this play than I am about the start.
But even then, I don't think he's the type of guy that you need to have start 30 games to hit this number. I mean, I think if he's starting 24, 25 games, he's a sneaky chance. I mean, in 28 games in 2022, he nearly had 200 strikeouts. So you feel like even if he's a tick below that 10 and a half strikeout per nine, but maybe a tick above the 9.5 that he was in 2023 before he got hurt. I mean, you're looking at probably needing only 25 or 26 starts to hit 150.
So they can skip a start or two. He could be shut down with a few weeks to go, and maybe he doesn't get above 60, 70 pitches for the first two starts. And I'm still at a place where I'm really happy to be playing. If you look at some of the game logs in that 2022 season we're talking about, he was just consistently racking up strikeouts. He had 4 double-digit games, 2 of those being 11, and in 13 starts he had 8 strikeouts or more. Work on numbers like that, low 20s starts wise, is right where you want to be. 20 of his 28 or 19 of his 28 starts had 7 or more strikeouts. He was much more of that kind of consistent 7, 8, 9, 10 guy than a Chase Burns, who was kind of 10 or 2. And if he's back to his best and he's feeling right within himself, I'd be happy to take this all the way up to 180 at 11s.
And again, that's what you're taking the punt on, right? I mean, you mentioned the number there for Tarek Skubal, which are cartoon numbers, and you're going to be riding every start wanting him to strike out 8, 9, 10 a game for basically even money, right? So this is why you go value hunting in these markets and find a guy like Shane McClanahan, because that's what you're punting on, right? You're punting on him being in the form that he was 4 years ago in 2022, and whether or not he is, but you can have sort of some bumps in the road when you find guys like this, I guess, and still hit those numbers because they're so low.
Yeah, and I think the way all of these kind of plays are set up, whether you're going 3 units on the base and 1 on the top up, is of these 6 guys, and I'll talk about the last one in a minute. You might miss on 3 of them, but if you hit on the other 3 and 1 or 2 of them hits those like top end numbers, you're looking at a very healthy return, which is kind of the way you want to spread your ammunition a little bit when you're doing futures, rather than just go all in on one play and one line, because McClanahan could just dominate and you're hitting at 11s, and sure, you Kodai Senga doesn't make a single start all year and Chase Burns pitches out of the bullpen, but this can cover some of that.
Well, look, you didn't tell me any of these before we hopped on, but I certainly wasn't expecting Brandon Woodruff, Kodai Senga, Chase Burns, Shota Imanaga, and Shane McClanahan. Those probably weren't the 5 first names that were going to come out of my mouth. So give us the 6. Who's the 6th play that you've got?
You wouldn't be guessing this one either, I don't think.
Although I could have guessed that I wouldn't be guessing it.
It's probably a different theme. It's a different theme to some of the others. It's maybe closer to the Chase Burns than anything. I thought the pricing was really interesting for Cam Schlittler, the young Yankee starter who broke onto the scene sort of middle of last year's season, and he impressed pretty much right out of the gates as a starting pitcher. At a time when they were so thin due to injuries to Garrett Cole, Rodon, they really needed someone, and Schlittler really quickly became that guy to the point where he pitched a very impressive postseason game. Was that against the Blue Jays, I think? Like he was consistently being trusted, and I think for me, what was even more confidence building in their faith in him was he was thrown around in a lot of trade talks approaching the deadline. And I from my understanding, the D-backs were trying to get him in exchange for Gino, and instead they went and said, we'll go take Ryan McMahon instead. We don't want to trade Schlittler. We think he's going to be a huge part of next year. He had 14 starts last year with a sub-3 ERA, impressive 84 strikeouts in 73 innings. Rodon and Cole are both on the IL till May and June, respectively. So Schlittler's effectively going to be the SP2 behind Max Fried for about half of a season. And clearly they're going to trust him to do that based on everything we've seen from the organization's handling of him so far. This is a strikeout-prone division. We've talked about it for as much as it's a case for Dylan Cease. Unfortunately, he won't get to pitch to the Yankees, but I still think going against the Rays, Boston, and Baltimore, there's going to be a lot of upside in some of those divisional starts. You're getting $2.35 for 140 strikeouts and $5 for 160, which I think are really nice numbers for a guy who's going to be able to build on last season. It wasn't like a full rookie season where sometimes guys in that first or second year, they need to just pull back a little bit because of how many innings are on the arm. 73 innings in what was basically half a season last year, I think has him primed to be coming right out of the gates and having a real factor early on, and a 10.4 strikeout rate. Doing what he did last year, it's a guy I want to be buying stock in. And that that start that we had, sorry, it was against the Red Sox, that 12 strikeout start, 8 innings pitched, 107 pitches, like that was effectively the 15th start of his career. He's gone out and done that. And I think that storyline has gotten forgotten a little bit behind like what Trey did in the World Series for Toronto. And, some of those kind of playoff runs really quickly get forgotten if you don't go on to make the World Series. But he was just carrying that Yankees rotation. And all signs point to him being able to go a step further this year, which for me, 140 strikeouts, like there are a lot of average starting pitchers who can get 140 strikeouts. I think this kid's a lot better than average, to the point where I think 160 at $5 is well and truly in range as well.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Trey Savage there because I was going to bring him up because these guys are in similar spots, right? I mean, Savage didn't make as many starts during the regular season. I think he made 3 appearances during the regular year last year before basically being leaned on the entire postseason. And Savage's strikeout numbers were actually better than Schlittler's in the postseason in terms of strikeouts per 9 in the playoffs. I think Schlittler he ended up somewhere around 9 Ks per 9, whereas, I mean, Savage was ridiculous. There were a couple of those outings in the ALCS into the World Series where he was outrageous, right? And I mean, so he had a 12.7 K per 9 just in the postseason last year in 6 games. 5 of those were starts. For comparison, can you get a number on Savage? Do you have numbers on what his?
Yeah, so that 160 strikeout mark, where Schlittler's sitting at $5, you'd be getting $1.52 for Trey, which I just think is way over the top. And I think a lot of sort of that recency bias and spotlight bias. It was one of the guys I was excited to see where they'd set the lines when I sat down to do this on Sunday, and I just shook my head and said, not a chance.
Well, it goes exactly to what you're talking about, right? If Schlittler had gone on and made it to the World Series and they had more eyeballs on him, say he gets 6 starts and does the same thing that he did in that, that performance against the Red Sox, say that goes on and does that 2 or 3 more times, it's probably the reciprocal, right? Savage, you're sitting here looking and going, oh, well, maybe his numbers, 140 strikeouts at $2.35 and Schlittler's is a lot higher. So you're right. Maybe it is just the fact that the bookies are leaning a little bit more on the fact that you got to see that guy a little bit further on in October and make a judgment. So maybe it is that because Schlittler sort of slid under the radar and the Yankees didn't get as many postseason games, i.e. he didn't get as many appearances, that's where the value is inherent. I'm actually surprised that number like Savage is as high as it is.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at, I think if you look at Savage's sort of setup with where that rotation is, they just signed Dylan Cease. Kevin Gossman's been the guy for years. You've got Shane Bieber kind of ramping up. You've got Barrios, who may or may not be a starter. Like, for me, there's less of a path there to that first half of the season sort of domination than there is for a Schlittler who's going to be, like I said, SP2 behind Fried. Then Cole and Rodon will come back. They'll be extra careful with both guys. So I think that there's a world where they're leaning more and more on him. And they've already shown they'll do that by letting him pitch 107 pitches in a do or die game against Boston.
Yeah. And again, this is all about value hunting. I mean, we saw you do it last year, with the exception of maybe a couple of guys. But some of those were a bit more obvious with those higher strikeout numbers. But weirdly, you've gone all guys that are south of that 200 mark and really even south of 190 and 180. So you've really gone out there to find some value in your pitcher numbers this year.
Yeah, which I think is how I always want to play. And, it was kind of like Hunter Brown last year. One that I'm really upset I missed out on last year was Mackenzie Gore. I played him regularly throughout the season, but he ended up putting just a beautiful season together from a strikeout point of view. And now, for me, the boat there has been missed because Mackenzie Gore's $1.83 for 180 strikeouts, and I'm not going to play that because he's proven that he can do it, and he's coming off a season where he's done it, and that's just not really my formula for something like this. And if you are going to do that, then you certainly wouldn't be taking any top-ups. It's the same with a Hunter Brown, $2 for 200 strikeouts. Like, I just can't have that compared to the $5 we were getting last year. So instead, it's kind of over now to find some guys that are going to break through for different reasons, whether it's increased role, bounce back, return from injury. That's kind of where I want to be at.
And just looking at a few other guys, and again, look, this is questions without notice in types of numbers that we can see. Again, with guys that would have probably jumped well up on these lists from where they were last year. I mean, you think about a guy like Brian Wu, like his numbers this year are probably 30 strikeouts higher maybe than what his his over-under would have been last year. I mean, Drew Rasmussen of the Rays is probably another one of those guys. I mean, he had such a great year last year. Garrett Crochet is probably another one. Trevor Rogers, potentially even with Baltimore. I mean, he only made 18 starts last year. So, I mean, what could he potentially do an entire season? But I guess the problem is you want to catch these guys. Largely what you've done with some of these is either coming off injury, young guys that have had a good appearance in the postseason, guys that maybe had a down year and you're banking on them getting back to what their form was previously, as opposed to looking at that list of top guys, because as you talked about, the numbers that they got to hit are just so high. So if you have that one little hurdle or one speed bump, it's hard for them to get to 200, 210, 220.
Yeah, it's no different to, you watch a horse, so you're on a horse at 15-1. It comes flashing home, it just misses, and next start, everyone's got it black booked and you're going to get $2 about it. But the one that you just missed was the shot at 15s that lost in a photo. Yeah, you could throw like a Christopher Sanchez into that conversation as well. He had a really good season and now it's just kind of too late. Also around the 200 mark, $1.95 is Luzardo. I just can't have that. I'll take it in situations like, there'll be plus spots for him to bet, but he's also prone to sort of blowing up. So is a Robbie Ray. Like I can't really make a case for any of these guys that are sitting around the 190, 200 mark compared to the guys I like at 150, 160 who could well push on to 200 and you're getting double digit prices to find out.
Just so that I know, I mean, let's look at the two strikeout leaders from last year in each league. You mentioned Crochet there, who was second in the Cy Young voting. He struck out 255 last year. What is his even money figure for 2026?
Who's that?
Crochet.
You'd need to take $2.20, about 240.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just madness.
You're not doing that.
I mean, every start, you have 2 or 3 starts of 1 or 2, whether it's rain delay or whatever it is, there you've got to pick up 1 or 2 elsewhere. There's not a guy I would be touching at that mark.
So then if we look at the National League, Logan Webb led the NL in strikeouts last year, made 34 starts, which again, even to make 34 starts, you're taking a gamble. So, I mean, he struck out 224 in 34 starts. What's his number for even money look like? 210?
It's slightly more palatable. He's a 190 strikeouts at $1.95.
See, that's actually, you'd be much more likely to take that than you would a similar
240 for Crochet.
240 for
without a question. You don't leave yourself any room for upside there, which I guess is part of the problem. I mean, you could take him for 220 at $7 or 210 at 430, which is not a terrible play. But yeah, I mean, he's also been a genuine workhorse as well, right? So kind of, is there a question there around like potential mileage on the arm? I mean, I don't know how many, he threw 207 innings last year. He threw 204 the year before, 216 the year before that. He's led baseball innings pitched for 3 years. That's kind of like a red flag to me. That's a horse that's been up for a little bit too long this prep, and could be due for a spell. And I never like the idea that you need them to do what they did before, which was brilliant, to get even money. It just feels like the value's gone.
Yeah, the strikeout numbers maybe are artificially inflated because of the amount of innings that he's pitching. It's like, to use your horse racing reference, a horse that's got a lot of prize money, but that's because it's going around every week.
Money spinner.
So that's 6 guys in terms of pitching: Brandon Woodruff, Kodai Senga, Chase Burns, Shota Imanaga, Shane McClanahan, and Cam Schlittler. That's why you tune into the expats, because you're going to hear names that you're probably not going to hear on a lot of other baseball podcasts. But before we let you go, it's not just about pitchers today. We're not really going to talk hitters individually until later in the week, where Spoon gives us some home run and RBI props for some of the offensive guys. But we touched on this a little bit when we were back in the saddle late last week, Spoon, in terms of teams that you're looking at for win over unders. And obviously you were in the lab a little bit on Sunday. The wheels were turning after we had a chat on Friday. So who are the teams that you've identified that you want to take a stab at this year?
I'll do the quickest one first, because there's a measure of heart in it, which is going to be no surprise to anyone. But I thought $5 about the D-backs to win 90 games was quite generous, in the sense that I think they're either going to win 70 games or 90 games. I don't think this is going to be a 500 team. They've been a top 5 offense in baseball for years. Go back 3 years to the World Series run. Last year, they set all sorts of records that you don't want to have for games blown by the bullpen. I think they left something like 40 wins out there on having what was a historically bad bullpen. This bullpen was poor heading into the season, but then you had 5 guys have Tommy John surgery last year. And by the end of it, we were just kind of grabbing anyone off waivers to go out there and eat some innings. And even then, the offense was putting up 5-6 runs a game and losing. I think if the offense can match what they were doing last year, which, when you've got Ketel Marte, Corbin Carroll and Gerardo Perdomo sort of leading the charge there, who are all still heading into, if they haven't even hit their prime yet, except for the case of Ketel. I think 90 wins is there. And I also quite like it because I think the Padres and the Giants are perhaps both being a bit overrated this year. The D-backs are also a different way you could play this is for the same price of $5, you can get the D-backs to finish second in the division. And that's maybe a more realistic or holistic way of looking at it. But I'm kind of factoring in D-back success against Padres and Giants into the win total. But I could also see a world where they win 85, 86 games, and that puts them ahead of San Francisco and San Diego. Sure, we play the Dodgers, but so do all the other teams in that division. I think if they're hanging in there at around 500 ball come June, when you get back a Corbin Burns, you bring back Justin Martinez, who looks like he could be the next superstar closer in baseball. AJ Park, who's was looking like a brilliant closer himself and would probably be that 8th inning guy. All of a sudden, that bullpen situation changes completely. There's also scope to move like an Erod into the bullpen because the D-backs have kind of found themselves now with like 4 or 5 SP2, SP3 types. I think bringing back Zach Gallen on a 1-year deal, which ended up being less than the qualifying offer, is probably humbling enough for him that he needs to go out and have a really strong season. I'm not so quick to just completely write him off because of how well he pitched in Arizona for so long. And I think there's something really interesting that the D-back sickos like myself sort of cottoned onto in his season last year. Was we brought in James McCann as like a veteran catcher who ended up working almost exclusively as Gallen's catcher for the second half of the season. And he got his ERA down to below 4, which by his career standards is not great, but it was 5.4 in the first half. A lot of things seem to be clicking for him. And again, whether that's coincidence or the start of some, turning corner kind of moments, I think there's a few guys that can go out and provide upside. If the D-backs are competitive for the first 2 months of the season, they've got a stacked farm that, we could be looking at trade acquisitions and that sort of thing. And then it's really how do your Giants and your Padres kind of go from there.
Well, and Fangraphs have taken a bit of an each-way bet on this because they've got the Diamondbacks finishing at 81 and 81, but they've also got the Giants finishing with the same record. So they're essentially saying that they think the Dodgers, at least on their 2026 win projections for teams, essentially are saying the Dodgers are only going to be, it will be the only team with a winning record in the NL West. Do you think the Dodgers can have a 98 to 100 win season and the D-backs still be a 90 win team? Or do you feel like the Dodgers need to regress slightly?
Yeah, I think it's almost one where, as I'm talking myself through it a little bit, I probably do like the second in division a lot more at the same price point for the reason you mentioned. And just also, I would have the D-backs, the Giants, and the Padres all at the exact same level. Like they shouldn't be. I'm not sure what the Fangraph projections are, but I wouldn't have
Padres 2 games back of both the Giants and D-backs. So they've got them 2 games worse on their 2026 projection.
Yeah, so 5s for the division makes no sense. About 3, it's a truly 3-horse race because the Dodgers will run away with it and the Rockies will do the reverse. I think you're getting $5 about what is probably a $2.50 outcome.
Is it to finish exactly second or just to finish top down? Finish
second. So if you needed to at any point, if you got scared that the D-backs were going too well and it was like dashing the Incredibles where they have to slow him up and get him to second, sure, you could put $10 on D-backs to win the division and get yourself out that way. But yeah, I actually think, just thinking out loud and speaking through it, that makes a lot more sense probably than the 90 wins because, there's probably 12 losses against the Dodgers in there that, you're budgeting for 72 losses in a 90-win season, and that's 20% of them against a division rival. Second team, I think we spoke about a little bit, and one of the teams I'm buying a lot of stock in this year, the Orioles are $2.70 for 90 wins, and I'm really bullish on this team. I was hoping that their win line was going to be a little bit lower. I think it's 84, 85 and a half, which means you're getting something in the high 2s for this 90 win mark. I would have loved to get 350 about it, but I just think all the pieces are there in all 3 facets of the game: lineup, rotation, bullpen. It's the ultimate bounce back season for so many reasons. And I think last year in almost every sense was just too bad to be true. And I'm gonna sort of back that up here with something on the Orioles because we know the Blue Jays are going to be great. I'm not so sure Boston are going to be a wildcard team this year. They just seem to be in that kind of spiral where, to be honest, the Rays were for a few years where you kind of go close, and then the bottom just falls out. Crochet had a brilliant season last year, which contributed so much to their success in the season. If you look at the lineup, it's not doing a lot for me. You're relying on a lot of youth. So you've got Jarren Duran, Trevor Story, who hasn't been able to stay healthy, Roman Anthony, who had a brilliant sort of cup of coffee, Contreras at the cleanup spot, Wilyer Abreu, Caleb Durbin, Marcelo Mayer, Cedar Rafaela, and Carlos Narvaez. Like, that's not screaming 80, 90 win team to me. You've obviously got Garrett Crochet and, to an extent, and Suarez kind of holding down that rotation. But then it's Sonny Gray, Brian Bayo, who is one of my guys, but I'm not sure consistently over a season, and Johan Oviedo. That I don't think this team finishing above Baltimore on paper with how they're constructed. And I'm also still a little bit unsure about the Yankees. Just, I think not having Cole and Rodon for so long, that rotation drops off in a hurry. They had to go out and get like a Ryan Weathers because they couldn't complete a rotation. Max Fried was brilliant, I think better than I expected, but he did so without striking out a lot of guys, which is often a red flag for a starting pitcher in today's baseball. And if all of a sudden they're getting 5 less wins from Max Fried starts, I could have the Orioles well and truly competing with the Blue Jays for this division. And if they're doing that, they're going to be around that 90 win mark. So I think $2.70 is a pretty nice price. And to be honest, it's one I think you'd be able to price shop a little bit elsewhere and probably get closer to $3.
Well, I was actually looking at this a couple weeks ago. I would like to find a market, not that I would put it on, but I'd like to find a market to see what the price would be just specifically for the Orioles to finish higher in the division than the Yankees. Because I'm with you. I mean, the Fangraphs have got the Yankees projected at 88 wins, which seems crazy high to me. I mean, there's only 3 teams listed higher than them: the Dodgers, the Braves, and the Mets. The only 3 that they've got listed better than the Yankees, finishing sort of on equal 88 wins with the Mariners. I think that feels a little bit high for the Yankees. They've also got the Red Sox finishing a game better than the Orioles at 86 wins. And the Orioles, to your point, 85 wins, which is why the market is where it is at 85.5. But I mean, you've explained it perfectly there. You feel like those projections just have it wrong. You feel like the Red Sox and the Yankees both could regress. And I mean, the reason why you look mainly, I mean, obviously with the balanced schedule, you play a lot more than just inside the division, but the place where you start initially is the teams inside your division because that's who you play the most. So when you feel like those 2 teams are probably not going to hit, I mean, I don't know that I'd be backing the Yankees to hit the 88 win mark. And you sound like you're not even necessarily high on the Red Sox being a team that could even be 4 or 5 games above 500. So for those reasons, I think you definitely got to take a crack at the Orioles. And if you're getting that kind of money on 90 wins, I mean, you could almost just take the over on 85.5 to hedge at a little bit lower win.
Yeah, or I guess by that thinking, you're looking, Orioles $5 for the division, Blue Jays $3.75. Like whether that's the sort of 1.5 units on Baltimore at that price, half the unit on the Blue Jays, and you're really laying the Yankees at. I mean, I cannot have Boston at $4 for that division. I think that's madness. $3.75 on Sportsbet. That's I think gross unders based on a team that all of that success and win projection seems to be riding on 4 or 5 young guys taking a massive step forward, which very rarely happens in baseball, as well as a Garrett Crochet repeating a Cy Young level campaign. They're probably one of my biggest lays of a team this year, Boston. And by that sort of measure of thinking, it means the way I kind of look at a lot of these early season plays on a team where their win mark is set usually correlates to how their prices are set for the first couple of months of the season. It won't be surprising if I'm betting against Boston as, on teams that are road dogs heading to Fenway for a while to start that year until that kind of corrects.
I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find another division in recent memory where you feel like 4 different teams could win the division and those 4 teams could finish in any order and you wouldn't really be surprised. And Tampa Bay is always an unknown, right? You're never surprised when Tampa Bay just randomly jumps out of their skin and has an 85 to 90 win season. So I don't think, if you fast forward to September, any order that the AL East finishes in, I don't think would be a massive surprise. So in just looking at, let's just play hypothetical, looking at that market for the AL East, you play bookie. What would you give me for Baltimore to finish higher than the Yankees? $3?
I think you'll get about 270, 280, which is a great bet.
I think I would take that. We'll talk off air.
Yeah. big time. The last one was another one I kind of just briefly flagged at the end of the last episode as a team I'm kind of keen to watch as a potential bolter this year. Thought the Royals to win 90 games at $3.75 was really nice value. I think it's a very weak division. They are second favorite at $3.20 to win that division. The Tigers are the team to beat until they're not, and they've kind of added some reinforcements on the pitching front. The Twins have never been so far below league average payroll as they are this year. They've basically just given up. They're trying to sell the team. I can't even have them at $7.50 to win the Central. I think they should be 25s. I'd probably have them at the same price as the White Sox, given it's literally Byron Buxton, Joe Ryan, and friends. The Guardians, I'd put them in a similar category. I was kind of talking about with Boston before. Feels like they've been knocking on the door for a while without ever taking that next level. Often you can stay in that level of good to not great that becomes kind of a cycle, and then the bottom falls out. That wouldn't surprise me at all if that happens this year for the Guardians. You've got guys like Jose Ramirez just taking a reduced deal because he wants to stay there, and that's great. But how hungry does that make your star player? I'm not sure. I think the Royals can win 90 games and not win the Central, which is where, you compare it to the D-backs conversation we're having before. It was like, well, you've got such a clear standout top team. I think the Royals are going to get a lot of beating up on a White Sox, a Twins, and to a lesser extent a Guardians team that they can pick up, 50 wins just about in their own division. And then with some of the top level talent they've got, I think they're going to be competitive most games. I still question the lineup a little bit, but I think the rotation, the bullpen have carried that team for a long time, and they are one of those kind of sneaky underrated pitching factories that keeps producing like top talent arms. And in that ballpark, that they can win ugly. Eric often likes to get us to watch an under 7.5 at Kauffman Park, and I'm not sure I'm going to be doing that every game day this year. But I think at $3.75, I could see the Royals winning 90 games this year.
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks like an old war veteran of having to watch games at Kauffman Stadium with the Royals and the Twins on a random Tuesday and making sure that they hit under 6.5 or something atrocious. Look, a lot of these teams that Fangraph is hedging their bets with, and teams that they're saying 500. I mean, the Royals are another one of those. They've got them at exactly 81 and 81. The same way that they had the Diamondbacks. I mean, you look at all the teams actually that they've projected to be 81 wins. It's almost like they're all just like, imagine just the shrug emoji, because it's like these teams that they have listed here could go either direction. I mean, have a listen to these teams. The Astros, the Rangers, the Brewers, and the Giants are the teams aside from the Royals and the D-backs. You could make a case for all of those teams to go any direction. So in saying what you're saying, I mean, if it's the same win total that you're looking at for the Royals, but there's no clear standout in the division, it almost feels like looking at the Diamondbacks to finish exactly second in that division is the play. But with the Royals, I think you'd be more inclined to take the 90 wins as opposed to finish exactly second, because it feels like they very realistically could win that division.
Yeah, and I think, obviously when they're doing these win projections, I think you start with your extremes at both ends, right? Like you start with your Dodgers, how many games they're going to win. And then you go right down to the Rockies and kind of start there. And then you've just got that bell curve in the middle, to your point, where it is the shrug. It's like, who knows? But if you're, I don't recall too many times a team's projected to go 81 and 81 and they do go around that mark. Usually, I mean, like the Braves are expected to have a pretty good season last year, and they just had the most brutal run of injuries. By a certain point of the season, I reckon a month into the season, just about, they had no one from their starting rotation. They end up 10 games under 500 with 76 wins. No one would have had the Miami Marlins winning more games than the Braves last year. The Cardinals had some decent expectations, and he's 6 games below 500. I think, you're going to get, I mean, the Twins, 70 wins last season. I dare say their projection heading into the year, based on the fact that they had a playoff run the year before, would have been in the mid 80s. So it seems like they're usually not 1 or 2 off, you're kind of 10 off. And if you're going to be that far off, I'd rather just take an alternate play at 375 and stake accordingly than to smash, Kansas City over 81, because I kind of feel like they win 70 games or 90 games.
Yeah, and no, you're right. I mean, it feels like all those teams that are projected to be exactly a 500 team either end up 10 games above 500 or 10 games below it, because you have teams that were expected to perform below that and teams that were expected to perform above that.
Net zero.
That are the ones that ultimately finish with a 500 record. So the teams that we like, just to reiterate, the D-backs 90 wins, the O's 90 wins. Well, maybe the D-backs more so, a market if you can find it. to finish exactly second in that division. But no doubt Spoon's going to have a little flutter on the 90 wins for the D-backs, 90 wins for the Orioles, and 90 for the Royals as well. And again, this has been a long podcast, so we will on Instagram put up a post and post some of these plays as well. We're also in the process of putting a website together, which is going to make these things a lot easier. And it's going to allow Spoon to do this on more of a daily basis whenever the MLB season begins. You can't see him at the moment, but he's very excited. That's Spoon's excited face. So we are in the process of getting that up and running. So you'll have picks, maybe not daily, but semi-daily at baseballexpats.com. So we're looking forward to that. And we will have another episode later in the week where Spoon will talk through some of his best offensive plays for the upcoming season in terms of home runs and RBIs. And we'll touch on what's happening with Destiny Draft, everybody's favorite segment here on the Baseball Expats. Well, Spoon, that was very informative. I need to go take a math test or a Panadol, one of the two. I'm not exactly sure because there was a lot of
some Shane McClanahan highlights, I think.
There were a lot of things that you filled my head with, so I need to go decompress. But thanks for that. Enjoyed it, my friend. We'll chat to you later in the week.
Done, man.